Elena Rhodes stepped onto the jet bridge with the quiet grace of a woman who had long stopped needing to prove herself. At 42, she carried the kind of confidence that came not from loud declarations, but from decades of perseverance. Dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit and low heels, she looked every bit the accomplished executive she was, yet she wore her status lightly. Her natural hair neatly pulled back framed a face calm but alert. She carried no assistant, no branded luggage, no entourage, only a slim leather tote and a hardcover book, the plain and ultra-luxurious private charter under the Rhodes Aviation label awaited passengers on the tarmac at JFK. It was a bright, late-morning sunlight glinting off the jet's smooth silver hull, the kind of aircraft that didn't just fly, it made a statement. Inside the cabin gleamed with soft gold accents. Cream Leah Elena boarded near the end of the group. Ahead of her, an older white couple, Mr. and Mrs. Colton, frequent flyers with the company, had just been greeted with warm familiarity by the flight staff. "Always a pleasure, Mr. Colton," said Vanessa, the lead flight attendant, her voice honeyed. Mrs. Colton gave a polite smile before S. As Elena approached, Vanessa's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but enough. The smile faded. The warmth cooled. Boarding Elena offered a slight smile and gestured to the digital pass already scanned at the gate. "I'm in 1C, she said evenly. Vanessa hesitated. Her eyes darted toward the seat, then back to Elena. "That section is reserved for our premium clients," she said, her voice taut. The words were polite, but the tone carried a familiar chill. Elena paused, then responded with quiet steadiness. "Yes, that's me." There was a beat of silence thick and unmistakable. Vanessa's lips tightened into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course she said, though it sounded anything but certain. Still, she stepped aside, allowing Elena to pass. Elena moved with calm assurance toward her seat, placing her tote beneath the chair and pulling out her book. She didn't scan the cabin. She didn't look for approval, but she felt the eyes anyway, the sideways glances, the silent calculations. A few rows back, a woman in oversized sunglasses leaned slightly forward, nudging her husband. "She must have won a contest or something," the woman whispered too loudly. Her husband chuckled softly, shaking his head. Elena said nothing. She'd been here before, if not in exact geography, then in experience. Boardrooms, elevators, luxury lobbies. There was always someone who saw the surface and assumed a story. But today she had hoped for different. This flight was business, not a battle. Vanessa moved briskly through the cabin, her attention fixed on the passengers offering champagne to the Coltons, fluffing pillows for the businessman across the aisle, laughing gently with a socialite in the rear row. But she passed by Elena without a word, without even the pretense of hospitality. Elena waited. 10 minutes passed, then 15. When Vanessa returned with another tray of drinks, Elena gently raised a hand. "Excuse me?" She said, her voice quiet but clear. "Could I have a glass of water, please?" Vanessa stopped mid-step, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I'll get to you when I can," she replied curtly before walking away. The words landed like ice water, not loud, not overt, but deliberate. A few passengers exchanged glances. No one spoke. Elena leaned back in her seat, exhaling slowly through her nose. She glanced down at her lap where her hands rested, then lifted her gaze toward the window. The plane hadn't even left the ground, and the shape of the flight was already taking form. In the aisle, Vanessa's voice rang out again, this time louder. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to move to the rear cabin." The tone was unmistakable now, command layered over condescension. Elena blinked slowly, then turned her head. "I'm sorry, this seat is not for standby or promotional passengers," Vanessa continued. "I'll escort you to the rear before takeoff. Please gather your things." Silence fell across the cabin. Elena remained still. "I believe there's been a mistake," she said calmly, though her voice now carried weight. "This is my seat. You should check the manifest again." Vanessa gave a short, humorless laugh. "I don't need to check anything. I know who belongs in this section." Elena's face remained composed, but her eyes held something sharper now. Not anger, not even frustration, but precision. She spoke quietly. "You're making a mistake." The moment stretched. Passengers leaned in without meaning to. A young flight attendant, nervous and pale, stood at the galley edge, clearly unsure of what to do. The man in seat 2A looked away uncomfortably. Mrs. Colton clutched her knitting tighter. And then Vanessa said the thing that would change everything. "If you don't move to the back of the plane," she said loud enough for all to hear, "I'll call security." Elena exhaled slowly and looked her in the eye. "Call whoever you need to." And with that, the cabin's temperature dropped several degrees. Because while everyone saw a quiet woman who didn't belong, what they didn't see, what they couldn't yet imagine, was that this woman didn't just belong here. She owned the plane. The hum of the engines had barely settled into their steady rhythm when the unease in the cabin began to crystallize into something heavier. Elena Rhodes sat quietly in seat 1C, her hands folded neatly over her book, which now remained closed on her lap. Outside the window, the skyline of New York was beginning to shrink beneath a quilt of soft clouds. Inside, however, a storm was forming, one not of thunder or wind, but of pride, prejudice, and something even more dangerous, unchecked authority. Vanessa Miller moved through the cabin again, her tray lined with cold bottles of water and crystal tumblers. Her smile returned as she offered drinks to the Coltons and the businessman across the aisle. But when she reached Elena's row, her steps slowed, then shifted slightly just enough to bypass her altogether. The tray tilted, but no gesture was made toward the woman she had already decided didn't belong. Elena lifted her head slightly and asked in a voice even softer than before, "Excuse me, could I please have a glass of water?" Vanessa didn't look at her. She kept walking. "I'll get to you when I have time," she snapped over her shoulder. It was a small moment, a forgettable one for those not watching closely. But to those who had felt it before, been dismissed, diminished, or ignored, it rang loudly. A man 2 rows back, the one in the charcoal gray suit, glanced up from his newspaper. His brow furrowed. He didn't speak, but he was watching now. Minutes passed. Elena shifted gently in her seat, crossing one leg over the other, her knee extending just slightly into the aisle, not in any grand gesture, just a natural motion to stretch. And that's when it happened. Vanessa approached again this time with sharp steps and sharp eyes. Whether she was looking for confrontation or simply letting her emotions lead, no one could say. But what followed was unmistakable. Without a word, she stepped deliberately into the narrow aisle space directly into Elena's extended leg. The impact was small, but purposeful. The tray jolted. 2 glasses tipped. A splash of cold water arced through the air, landing squarely across Elena's lap and pooling on the polished floor beneath her seat. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Vanessa pulled back a hand raised dramatically. "Watch where you're putting your legs," she barked. "You've made a mess." The words, the volume, the accusation, they rang false to anyone paying attention. Elena sat still for a moment, looking down at the water soaking into her slacks. Then she slowly raised her eyes to meet Vanessa's. "I hadn't moved," she said calmly. "You walked into me." There was no accusation in her tone, no anger, just clarity. But it was that composure, the absence of submission, the refusal to be rattled, that seemed to set Vanessa off more than anything else. "I don't care what you think you're entitled to," Vanessa hissed, her voice just loud enough for those around them to hear. "You don't get to sit up here and act like you own the place." Another pause. Another breath. "I'm asking you one last time," Vanessa continued, "to take your things and move to the back of the plane." Elena didn't flinch. "You're overstepping," she said quietly. "You don't have the authority to." But before she could finish, Vanessa raised her hand and slapped her. The sound cracked through the cabin like a whip, sharp, unexpected, shocking. A woman across the aisle gasped, clutching her scarf. The businessman stood halfway from his seat, his expression stunned. The younger flight attendant, Madison, froze near the galley, her hand covering her mouth in horror. Elena turned her head slowly back toward Vanessa, the red imprint of the slap already rising on her cheek. She didn't touch her face. She didn't shout. Instead, she straightened her posture, placed both feet firmly on the floor, and looked directly into Vanessa's eyes. "You just made the worst mistake of your career," she said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. For a moment, the plane went silent. Even the hum of the engine seemed to retreat behind the magnitude of what had just occurred. Vanessa took half a step back, suddenly unsure. Her hand trembled slightly at her side, and her eyes darted to the other passengers, many of whom were now staring in disbelief, phones raised recording. But Elena remained still. Grace, the junior attendant, moved at last, her voice shaking. "I think we should call the captain." Vanessa didn't respond, because in that moment the power in the cabin had shifted completely. Elena no longer needed to assert anything. The damage had been done, and Vanessa had just written the headline of her own downfall. The silence in the cabin following the slap was unlike anything Elena Rhodes had ever experienced, not because it was quiet, but because it was loaded. It was the kind of silence that falls in courtrooms right before a verdict. It had weight, memory, and consequence. Passengers sat frozen as though unsure if what they had just witnessed had truly happened. But the reddening mark on Elena's cheek made it impossible to deny. Vanessa Miller, the lead flight attendant, stood just inches away, her chest rising and falling quickly. Whether it was from adrenaline, fear, or pride, even she wasn't sure anymore. Her hand, still trembling slightly, hovered uselessly by her side. She had crossed a line, and even her body seemed to realize it before her mind did. Elena remained seated, calm. Her hands rested on the armrest, her posture composed. She didn't reach for her cheek. She didn't shout. She didn't move at all. Instead, she looked at Vanessa with a steadiness that unnerved even the most skeptical passenger on board. "You just made the worst mistake of your career," Elena said again, but this time her voice carried further. It didn't need volume to command the cabin. It had gravity. From the corner, Madison, the junior flight attendant, stepped forward, her voice barely more than a whisper. "We need to alert the captain." "No!" Vanessa cut in quickly, her voice shrill and too loud, trying to regain control. "It's fine." She was being disruptive. "I was defending myself." "Defending yourself," the businessman across the aisle snapped, rising fully from his seat now. "We all saw what you did." More murmurs followed. A woman near the rear section whispered something to her teenage daughter. The man in 2B raised his phone slightly higher, ensuring the camera had a good angle. The tide was shifting, but Vanessa refused to see it. "She's not even supposed to be in this seat," she spat. "She's pretending. Probably got past the gate somehow." "I scanned my boarding pass," Elena said calmly. "It's a digital manifest. You can check it." "I don't need to check," Vanessa snapped. "People like you always find ways to manipulate the system." The room froze again. This time it wasn't just silence, it was shame. Even Vanessa seemed to hear her words as they hung in the air, ugly and unfiltered. Elena's face didn't change, but the light in her eyes cooled a few degrees. She slowly turned her gaze toward Madison. "Please contact the captain," she said. "Tell him Elena Rhodes requests immediate communication." Madison hesitated only a moment before nodding. She turned and disappeared toward the cockpit. Vanessa laughed once, bitter and sharp. "Oh, what, you know the captain now. Are you calling for backup? Should we all be worried?" Elena didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her tote and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved with precision, no frantic tapping, no drama. Just a few calm strokes on the screen, then she placed it face down on the armrest. "Done," she said more to herself than anyone else. Vanessa, suddenly unsure of the situation, took a step back. She looked around the cabin for support but found none. Even the Coltons, usually silent and indifferent, were now visibly uncomfortable. Mrs. Colton had stopped knitting entirely, her needles still in midair. Minutes passed. The quiet murmur of the engines filled the vacuum left by human voices. Then the cockpit door opened. Captain Hughes stepped out, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a military bearing that had once comforted first-time flyers. Today, however, he looked unsteady. His eyes scanned the cabin quickly, then locked on Vanessa. "Vanessa," he said, "we need to talk. Step aside." Vanessa's eyebrows lifted. Why now?" he said firmly. She crossed her arms but obeyed, stepping toward the galley. Captain Hughes approached Elena slowly, his expression unreadable. "Miss Rhodes," he said quietly with the kind of cautious respect that suggested he already knew. Elena looked up and offered a polite nod. "Captain, I just got off the phone with operations," he said loud enough for the nearest passengers to hear. "There's been a directive from Executive Control. They've confirmed your presence." Vanessa stepped forward again, her voice desperate. "What directive? What's going on?" Hughes turned slowly. "Miss Rhodes," he said evenly, "is the owner of this aircraft." The words fell like a thunderclap. Gasps erupted. The socialite in row 3 clutched her pearls. The teenager near the back leaned into her phone, whispering, "Oh my God, she owns the plane." Vanessa paled. No, that's not possible." Hughes looked grim. "Not only is she the owner of this jet, she's the CEO and principal shareholder of Rhodes Aviation Holdings, which manages this aircraft and more than a dozen like it." Now even Madison looked stunned. She turned toward Elena, eyes wide. "You own the airline, I do," Elena replied, rising slowly from her seat for the first time since boarding. She adjusted her blazer with careful precision. "And I've been observing how my staff treat passengers who don't fit their expectations." Vanessa's face was draining of color now. She stumbled backward half a step. "I didn't know. No one told me." "You didn't ask," Elena replied. "You assumed, you judged, and you struck me." Passengers were still stunned into silence, though several now nodded, muttering quiet words of agreement. A man near the front said, "This is exactly what happens when people abuse their role." Someone else added, "That woman didn't do a thing. She sat there with dignity the whole time." Captain Hughes cleared his throat. "Miss Rhodes, should I coordinate landing procedures?" "Yes," Elena said. "Unscheduled landing at Midway. I'll have ground crew ready." Vanessa's voice cracked. "You can't just, I didn't mean to." But Elena had already turned away. Her calm presence filled the cabin now like gravity. The intercom crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice announced, "we will be making an unscheduled landing at Chicago Midway Airport. Please remain seated and prepare for descent." The murmurs returned louder now, not confusion but buzz, a kind of electric tension. The moment was no longer about an unruly passenger. It was about something far larger, a reckoning, a revelation, and a rebalancing of power. The descent was smooth, silent. On the tarmac, a black SUV with tinted windows waited at the bottom of the jet stairs. Two suited assistants stood nearby, their posture rigid, eyes scanning the aircraft. As soon as the doors opened, they ascended swiftly, clipboard in hand. "Miss Rhodes," one said, voice warm and deferential, "we've briefed legal and PR. The footage is already secured and your statements are being prepped. Do you wish to make a press comment?" Elena shook her head. "Not yet. Internal first. This stays in-house until I say otherwise." The assistant nodded and stepped aside. Elena faced the passengers. "I regret that any of you had to witness what took place today," she said. "This is not what I've built this company to stand for. Every passenger, every human being deserves dignity, regardless of how they look, speak, or dress. I am deeply sorry for what you saw, but I assure you this will be addressed." Applause rippled through the cabin, hesitant at first, then building. Even Mr. Colton clapped, nodding with approval. His wife smiled quietly and folded her knitting. Vanessa still stood near the galley, pale and shaking. Elena approached her slowly. "Vanessa," she said, her voice cool but not cruel. "You're relieved of duty. Effective immediately." Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You'll be escorted off this aircraft," Elena added, "and you will be investigated for assault." From behind her, the cabin door opened again this time to reveal two airport police officers. One stepped forward with measured authority. "Miss Rhodes, we're here on your request," he said. "Would you like to press charges?" Elena didn't hesitate. "Yes," Vanessa gasped. "Wait, please. It wasn't meant to. I didn't know." "That's the problem," Elena said coldly. "You didn't want to know." The officer stepped forward, producing a pair of handcuffs. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for assault," he said, his tone professional but firm. "You have the right to remain silent." Vanessa's voice cracked. "You can't do this, I already have," Elena replied. Passengers watched in hushed silence as Vanessa's hands were cuffed behind her back. Her once flawless bun now looked askew, her proud stance crumbling. The same passengers she had once commanded now avoided her gaze or looked on with disappointment, some with phones discreetly recording. As the officers guided her down the aisle, Vanessa turned one last time. "Please," she begged, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I was just trying to keep order." Elena's gaze didn't waver. "Respect is order," she said. The door closed behind Vanessa. For a moment, the plane was still. Then slowly, Elena turned toward Madison, the younger flight attendant, who had stood frozen so many times but never cruel. The one who had hesitated, but hadn't turned away. "You," Elena said softly. "What's your name, Madison?" "Ma'am," she replied quickly, standing straighter. "You followed orders, but I saw your eyes. You knew something was wrong." Madison nodded, her voice trembling. "I wanted to say something, I didn't know if I could." "You can," Elena said. "And next time you must." "Yes, ma'am." Elena reached into her bag and handed Madison a slim card. "My office will be in touch. I believe we have a promotion to discuss." The young woman's eyes widened. "Thank you." As Elena turned toward the exit stairs, the passengers began clapping again, this time louder, more unified. Not for spectacle, but for justice. The businessman who had defended her earlier gave a soft smile. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for reminding us what strength looks like." Elena nodded once. Then, with steady steps and her assistants beside her, she descended the stairs into the waiting SUV. Inside the vehicle, as the door shut and the tinted glass dulled the world outside, one assistant turned to her. "What would you like us to tell the board?" "Tell them Elena said we just got a new case study on culture. And the media? Let them wait." As the car pulled away, Elena looked out the window at the jet she owned, still gleaming in the Chicago sun. This wasn't how she had planned to spend the day. But maybe it was exactly what needed to happen. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't throw status around. She didn't demand respect. She embodied it, and now she would make sure her entire company did the same. The boardroom of Rhodes Aviation's Manhattan headquarters was made of glass and silence. The morning sun streamed through the panoramic windows, casting long golden lines across the gleaming mahogany table. Every seat around it was filled, department heads, legal counsel, public relations officers, and the chief operating officer all waiting, all tense. Elena Rhodes entered without announcement. She didn't need one. She wore the same navy suit from the flight, now dry-cleaned and pressed, but still carried the quiet power of a woman who had no interest in theatrics. Her presence alone shifted the room's posture. Back-straightened coughs were suppressed, and side conversations ceased. She took her seat at the head of the table and set a folder down in front of her. "Let's begin." No one spoke first. Finally, her legal advisor cleared his throat. "Ms. Rhodes, we've reviewed the footage from multiple passenger recordings as well as the cockpit audio. There is no ambiguity. The lead attendant's behavior constituted physical assault, targeted discrimination, and gross misconduct under FAA and internal guidelines." Elena nodded slowly. "And the public response?" Her head of public relations glanced at the screen behind her, which displayed a muted live stream of national news channels. "It's already trending. 3 hashtags within the top 10 on Twitter are tied to the incident. The footage of the slap has over 5 million views. We expect network coverage to intensify this evening." The chief operating officer leaned forward, his voice low. "We've suspended Vanessa Miller's employment pending investigation, but based on your instruction, we haven't issued a press release yet." "You were right to wait," Elena said calmly. "This isn't just about optics. This is about culture." She stood and moved toward the windows. Below Manhattan was waking up honking horns, blinking crosswalks, taxis threading through avenues. "When I started this company," she began, "I didn't do it because I needed another business under my belt. I did it because I wanted to change the experience of air travel, to build a brand that treated every single passenger as if they mattered, not because of what they wore or what their bank balance showed, but because they were human beings." The room was quiet. I was mistaken. She continued to think we could build that from policy alone. "We need more than procedures. We need accountability, personal, direct, and swift." She turned back to the group. "Vanessa Miller is to be terminated, effective immediately. Her access to any Rhodes Aviation property or system is revoked. Our legal team will cooperate fully with law enforcement on the assault charge." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. Additionally, she added, "We are launching a mandatory retraining program for all in-flight and ground staff effective within 30 days. We'll call it the Respect Above All Initiative. Every single employee, from baggage handlers to senior flight crew, will complete it, or they'll no longer work here." The PR director lifted his pen. "Should we make this announcement now, before the story expands?" Elena gave a single nod. "Prepare the statement. I'll deliver it on video myself." A quiet murmur of approval passed through the room. Then she paused. Her eyes met those of the legal counsel. "Any other loose ends?" He hesitated. "There is one. The passenger you promoted. Madison Lee, the junior flight attendant. She has no formal management experience, but her conduct, the fact she tried to intervene well, it's resonating with the public. The clips showing her hesitation and discomfort are drawing a lot of empathy." Elena smiled slightly. "Good," she said, "because we need leaders who feel, not just execute." She returned to her seat and tapped the folder in front of her. "Let's be clear," she said. "This wasn't a scandal. It was a mirror. And we're going to use it." Later that afternoon, in a modest police station just outside Chicago's Midway Airport, Vanessa Miller sat in a stark interview room. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly. Her hair, once immaculately styled, was now pulled into a simple ponytail. Her blazer had been taken during booking. The door opened. Detective Monroe stepped inside with a clipboard. He took a seat without looking at her. "You've been charged with misdemeanor assault and disorderly conduct aboard a federally regulated aircraft," he said plainly. "You've been advised of your rights. You have a right to an attorney." "I didn't mean to hit her," Vanessa said quickly, her voice shaking. "It wasn't planned. I lost control." "That's what the footage shows," Monroe said, finally looking up. "That you lost control." She wrung her hands together. "Isn't there any way to... I didn't know who she was. If I had known, you'd have treated her with more respect." She froze. He leaned forward slightly. "That's the problem, Ms. Miller. You shouldn't have had to know." Meanwhile, back at Rhodes Aviation HQ, Elena stepped into a small, soundproof recording studio. A single camera sat opposite her. No background, no makeup team, no lights beyond what was needed. The tech gave her a thumbs up. She looked directly into the lens. "I'm Elena Rhodes, CEO of Rhodes Aviation," she began. "And today I want to talk to you not just as a businesswoman, but as a fellow human being." She paused, not for drama, but to let the words settle. "Many of you have seen the footage. You've seen a woman, me, disrespected, humiliated, and struck aboard an aircraft I own. But what's more painful than the act itself is the reality that it reflects a broader pattern, one that many people experience every day, often without cameras." She looked down briefly, then back up. "I want to be clear. This will not be swept under the rug. Rhodes Aviation is built on the foundation of dignity, and today we recommit to that mission." She outlined the new training program, the internal reviews, the hiring of third-party oversight for anonymous staff reporting, and finally she ended with a message: "Respect is not conditional. It's not earned by title or skin tone or jewelry or zip code. It is a right, and as long as I lead this company, it will be treated as such." She exhaled, nodded to the camera operator, and stood. By evening, the video had gone live. Cable news picked it up within hours. Social media exploded with support. Celebrities, activists, even competing airline executives weighed in. Respect above all trended worldwide. News anchors praised Elena's poise. Think pieces appeared overnight, dissecting the deeper meaning of quiet power. The footage of her sitting calmly after being slapped, followed by her final words. "You just made the worst mistake of your career," became symbolic. Elena, however, didn't gloat. She didn't schedule interviews or appear on talk shows. Instead, she returned to work the next morning as usual, arriving before 8 a.m., greeting the security staff by name and reading through every passenger feedback email that came in from the previous day. Because this wasn't about a viral moment. It was about what came after. 2 weeks had passed since the incident in the sky, though. For Elena Rhodes, it had felt like both a lifetime and the blink of an eye. The days since her return to New York had been consumed with meetings, press briefings, legal consultations, and more personal messages than she could count. Some angry, some grateful, some tearfully familiar. But in the quiet hours of the morning before the headlines refreshed and the next issue appeared in her inbox, Elena often found herself staring at the corner of her office wall where sunlight pooled in the early hours. It reminded her that change the kind that mattered was always slow at first, like dawn, not lightning. Today was the first day she would fly again. Not for spectacle, not for oversight, simply because she had a meeting in Denver, but also because she needed to feel it, to step back into the cabin not as the CEO of Rhodes Aviation, not as the woman in the viral video, but as a passenger, as one of many, and to see what had shifted and what hadn't. At 7:45 a.m., Elena stepped through the private terminal at LaGuardia. There were no cameras, no entourage, only her assistant who stayed 2 paces behind and a leather briefcase slung gently over one shoulder. The gate agent greeted her with a smile that felt genuine. Not overdone, just enough. "Welcome aboard, Miss Rhodes. We're honored to have you flying with us today." "Thank you," Elena said quietly. The aircraft was a commercial mid-range jet, one of the newer models in her fleet, clean and sleek but not extravagant. Inside the cabin, air smelled faintly of eucalyptus, part of the newly piloted sensory wellness initiative. Subtle changes, tiny but human, were already being tested. As she stepped aboard, Elena felt it immediately. Not a shift in the air, but in posture, a kind of attentiveness. Not stiffness, not fear, just awareness. The crew didn't snap to attention, but they didn't brush past her either. Their eyes met hers. They saw her. The lead flight attendant stepped forward. She was in her late 30s with auburn hair neatly tied and a calm demeanor that radiated warmth rather than formality. "Miss Rhodes," she said, "welcome. I want you to know we've all completed the new protocol sessions. We're grateful for them. For what you said. It needed to be said." Elena nodded. "Thank you. What's your name, Claire?" the woman said. "Well, Claire," Elena said, "you've already set a different tone." She took her seat. Not in the frontmost row, not in the aisle marked executive, but further back by a window. She liked the quiet that came from looking out at something larger than herself. As the plane began to board, Elena observed. Passengers were greeted one by one. No one was ignored. No one was rushed. A middle-aged black man in a worn corduroy blazer was offered assistance with his bag, not assumptions. A mother traveling alone with 2 children was given help with coloring books and juice boxes, not just a strained smile. She could see its small gestures building something real. She didn't need grand speeches. She needed this. The cabin door closed. The jet taxied slowly. Outside the window, ground crew waved and Elena raised her fingers slightly in return. Somewhere in row 12, a teenage girl whispered to her father, "That's the lady from the video, right?" He looked over briefly, then whispered back, "She's the one who stood her ground." Elena heard it, but she didn't turn. She didn't have to. The plane lifted into the air with the same grace it always had, but something else rose with it, trust. Not restored fully. Not yet, but rising. Halfway through the flight, Claire returned with a tray coffee, a fresh croissant, and a handwritten note tucked beneath the napkin. Elena glanced up. "We thought you might like a quiet breakfast," Claire said. Elena smiled and unfolded the note. It read, "Thank you for reminding us that kindness isn't optional, it's essential. Crew 228, Flight 7L92. She sat for a long moment holding the note between her fingers, watching the sky stretch endlessly outside the window. For the first time in weeks, she let herself breathe deeply, not in relief, but in recognition. This was what it looked like when change began to land. The sun hung low as Elena Rhodes stepped off the jet bridge at Denver International Airport. The air was thinner here and cooler, but her pace remained steady. She was not rushing to a meeting nor heading straight for a waiting car. This evening she walked alone, unhurried, her footsteps echoing softly against the polished floor. Behind her, the crew was disembarking, offering her discreet nods of respect. Claire, the lead flight attendant, paused just long enough to say, "We'll carry this forward, ma'am. Every flight." Elena smiled. "That's all I ask." Later that evening, Elena sat in a quiet studio in downtown Denver, where a public broadcasting station had invited her to speak not about the incident, but about what it meant. She agreed not to retell what had already gone viral, but to frame it with clarity for those who had lived through similar moments, but never had the camera or the voice. The interviewer, a thoughtful woman in her 60s, leaned forward and asked Miss Rhodes if there's one message you'd want viewers to take from all this. What would it be, Elena thought for a moment. Then she said, "That respect isn't earned by appearance or position or wealth. It's owed to every single person, from the moment they step into a room or onto a plane or into a conversation. And when we treat it like something conditional, we lose part of our humanity." The interviewer nodded, visibly moved. "And to those who don't have your platform," she asked, "those who endure these things quietly every day," Elena's expression softened. "I'd tell them you are not invisible. You are not small. The world may not always see you, but that doesn't mean you aren't worth seeing. Keep standing. Keep showing up. Because when you hold your ground with grace, you shake the ground beneath those who try to diminish you." The broadcast would later be replayed thousands of times, especially in classrooms, leadership trainings, and airline corporate seminars. But for Elena, the moment passed simply. She returned to her hotel, removed her blazer, and poured a cup of tea. She did not scroll through comments or track trending hashtags. She didn't need to. The real victory wasn't viral. It was structural, quiet, steady. A month later, passengers on Rhodes aviation flights would notice small things: crew members greeting passengers by name, bilingual welcome messages, reconfigured training posters in staff lounges that read, "Not policy compliance, but human first." And in offices far from the skies, a new line began appearing on employee handbooks: "Respect isn't policy. It's practice." Elena Rhodes. She had not set out to become a symbol. But perhaps that's how symbols are born, not from shouting the loudest, but from standing still when everyone expects you to fold. And somewhere on another quiet flight across the sky, a young girl in row 6 will look out the window and see the world beneath her endless open possible. And maybe she'll remember a story her father told her, about a woman who owned the plane and taught the world how to fly with dignity.